coffee. I'm just going to apologize up front that I don't have any equations whatsoever. So I know that's why you need coffee after the excitement of Cyrus's to pick you back up for this. What I'm going to talk about today is I'm essentially workshopping a discussion paper that I'm working on with my colleague Ben, and that we're going to be presenting next week at a consultation event around research replication. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end. So what I want to do today is just present some of the key bullet points, essentially from that discussion paper, as a way to spark your discussion around those issues, and then depending on what you find interesting, I can maybe provide you with some of the anecdotes or background for some of these things. So when I shared my PowerPoint with my colleague, he was shocked and stunned that there wasn't a single picture. He thought it was the most boring thing that he'd ever seen, so he sent me some comments, some comics to use, including this one, apologizing for the fact that I'm actually using a PowerPoint presentation. So the question here really is, given the current situation around replication research, which is no matter how much people say it's a good thing, it turns out to be pretty contentious. Is there anything that a third party can do to help this? Are there roles that a third party can play to actually help with some of the inherent tension or conflict around replication research? So just the outline, I'm going to talk quickly about 3 different areas where we see challenges, talk for a few minutes about whether journals can play useful roles in addressing these challenges, then talk about what the different things are that we tried in order to address these challenges, and whether or not our attempts were replication successes or failures. So the 3 challenges we see are around definitions and objectives, around the incentives, both from the original author side and the replication researcher side, and around something that I'm provisionally calling replication ethics. You can tell me if that works for you or not. So why do we think about doing replication research? And here I am going to use the word replication. I'm going to use it generally, but understanding that the use of that word is in fact part of the problem, part of this definitions and objectives problem. But why would we do it? Well, we could think about a sort of a scientific process, a research process, and a policy informing process. So the scientific process is this idea that if we have an experiment, we want to continue to do the experiment again multiple times to see if in fact what the results show, it reflects some kind of underlying truth or something about what Fernando would call nature with a capital N, or we might think about consistent processes or relationships. And so here when we talk about replication, we're generally talking about what we would call external replication, which means doing the study or doing the experiment over again. And so you might think of the question that we're answering in the scientific process as being something along the lines of, is this finding true? Does it reflect something about a true or underlying fact or process? When we think about the research process, what we're trying to do with the replication is really validate the empirical results of a specific study. And so we're doing what we call the internal replication, which is using the original data set and trying to use the author's original methods. And we're asking questions along the lines of, first, can we reproduce the author's results doing everything that they did? So this is really the, if we rerun their code, do we get their results question, which is probably the most simplest form of what people would call pure replication. A slightly larger question is, if we take the original data and the methods as described by the researchers, what they write up in their paper, can we apply those methods as our own researchers to those data and get those results? People also consider that pure replication, but some people think that it actually should or shouldn't be done. And then finally, there's kind of this third stage within what could be pure replication, which is, if we can't, if we do what they say that they did and we don't get their results, then can we essentially diagnose what went wrong? So either maybe they didn't describe what they did the right way, and so we can go back and figure out, okay, we see how indeed they got their results. So we get it, we see their results, but now we can better explain actually what it is that they did. Right? And so that's kind of the furthest extent of what some people would consider pure replication, which is this more diagnostic attempt to reproduce the original author's results. And so the question around this process is more along the lines of, are these results right? Then the third is something we might think of as a policy informing process. So here what we're trying to validate is not just these results, this table 10 in this study is indeed right, correct, I can reproduce it, but are the findings from this study meaningful in terms of the implications and the policy recommendations? So here again, we want to use internal replication. We want to work with the original data set, but we can think of the exercise more broadly as reanalyzing the original data with the same research question. Okay? But not necessarily, or after we do the pure with additional methods. And so what we see being done here are studies that look at, are the results robust to different assumptions and methodological choices, and is the theory of change analysis complete? So did in fact the authors test alternative theories of change with these same data as a way to more fully validate the implications that they're suggesting for policy? And so here we might think of the question for this process as being along the lines of, are these findings meaningful? Okay? Or do they help answer questions like this? So the minefield in replication has mostly come down to this process where we're validating the assumptions and the methods, okay? The assumptions and the estimation techniques. And some people actually argue that this is not an extension, that this is kind of part of the scientific process because, in fact, it's another researcher taking another draw at the original data, asking the original question to see whether there's truth. So, or put differently, if the data reflects some underlying truth, then another researcher using good methods should in fact find the same kinds of results, regardless of whether they're exactly the same. Other people argue that it's really part of the research process because in fact there are rights and wrongs in conducting research, or good and bad research. And so when we're testing robustness, what we're doing is testing whether or not this was high quality research or not, and therefore replication that extends to robustness is part of the research process, or validating the original results of the paper. And so whether or not we use the word replication, or if we use the word replication, we allow these kinds of extensions, has been the largest area of minefield that we have certainly encountered. Okay, second challenge. So that was about first of all, what are the different objectives that we might have and how people are defining it. And I didn't go into all of the different definitions out there. There are a lot. So the second set of challenges are what the incentives are, and we can think about these both from the original author side and the replication researcher side, and then we can also, if we think about how to address them, we can think about positive incentives. Why would these people want replication, and why wouldn't they? So for original authors, why might they want their work to be replicated? Here I'm going to use the term generally. So one is that they might actually believe that this is part of the scientific process and the research process, and they want to build knowledge, and they really want somebody to take their data and their research question and reanalyze it. It's possible. It's possible that an original author could have that incentive. I only thought about that at the last minute this morning and added it, but I wanted to put that there. They could like it because it improves their credibility and influence. So if there are replications that generally are supportive of their work, that should actually make them look very good. So that's a good thing. And also, obviously, if somebody's doing research on your research, that is going to increase your number of citations. And if you believe that all publicity is good publicity, then it's a good thing. Possible. So why not? So one reason why not, and we hear this complaint a lot, is that it's a lot of time and effort. that even though your data may already be public, if somebody is trying to reproduce what you do, depending on how well you put together what Fernando would call your replication file or your research file to begin with, it could take a lot of time and effort on your part to try and help a replication researcher exactly reproduce your results. Okay? But of course, the other reason why not could come down to reputational effects if for some reason the replication study is deemed a failure. Okay? Now, why might there be a failure? And it's important to think about these because how we might address this could be different for these different reasons. So one is that the pure replication simply can't be completed. And this is what we see a lot when we do see evidence from graduate classes, for example, where people are doing replication studies. What we hear is that by the end of the semester, a lot of times the students say, I couldn't do it, I couldn't figure it out. So I don't know. Right? It's not that I think that the results really are wrong. It's just that I don't know whether they're right or wrong. I just couldn't get that far. I couldn't figure it out. Okay? The second reason for a failure could be that I completed the replication. I did everything, but their results are wrong. Okay? They made a mistake. I found the mistake, and so this is a replication failure. And then the third is if somebody does extensions, so robustness checks of some kind, and then suggests as a result of these, I think that your results are not valid. And therefore, I'm going to say they're a replication failure. Okay, so these are the three things that original authors might be worried about and why they might not want to have their research replicated. What about on the replication researcher side? So why might they want to do replication research? Well, one reason that we see is that people do replications often without the intent of publishing them just because they think it's a really good way to learn. Okay, so there is a lot of replication research that occurs just because people are doing this as a learning exercise. But also people sometimes want to do replication research because they think it's an important way of building knowledge and improving the quality of evidence for policy making or improving the quality of the knowledge that we're adding to a field. But finally, we may think that there are replication researchers who are in it for the possibility that they are going to show some problems with a very well-known study and therefore achieve some kind of publicity. Okay? So this is sort of a positive incentive for researchers, but one that we might actually want to diminish rather than promote. So why would replication researchers not want to do replication research? Okay, there's a lot of important constraints here. So one is that there's uncertain or low return on investment. So it's very difficult to get funding to do replication research. You don't know in the outset what you're going to find, but also you really don't know going into one of these studies how long it's going to take you. And we assumed that these studies would get finished in 6 months tops, and we have them taking a year or two because people go in and find out, well, there were 12 different data files. And then there were 3 different files that had different ways of merging the data sets. And then it turned out that the treatment was assigned 3 different ways, and I had to figure out which one they used, and so on. So going into it, it's hard to predict how much time it's going to take. But also, there are very valid concerns on the reputational side for doing replication research. Okay? The more benign is that people just think you're not a very interesting researcher. You're boring. Why don't you have any original ideas? You just want to go out and copy what other people do. But also, if you do happen to find something that calls into question something by somebody very powerful, that they could do things to try to hurt your reputation. And I've seen examples of that as well. And we've seen replication researchers be quite afraid of this possible negative effect on their reputation. Okay, so here's an example of the failure. Those numbers were collected actually before the program was launched, so if you found this, that probably wouldn't look very good for the original research. Okay, so this third area we're provisionally calling replication ethics. And the best way I've been able to think about it is that when you're doing a replication study, you are, in some sense, you have the original authors as the subject of your research. So obviously you have the research as the subject of your research, but if you are looking at what they did, you are now in some sense researching them, and they're clearly not anonymous subjects of your research. And that raises some questions. So One, what are the responsibilities of each side to share information? So is there something like informed consent for the original authors? Okay, maybe not consent, but do they have a right to know up front that you're about to replicate their work? Do they have a right to know what you intend to do when you do a replication, whether it's pure or you're doing other things? On the other side, what constitutes a complete replication file? Or how much responsibility do the original authors have to provide more information about what it is that they did? Or can they just stand back and say, look, I gave you the data, I told you what the methods are, you figure it out? What is the responsibility of the replication researcher to identify the source of the error? So this comes back to this question of, okay, I did everything that you said you did and I didn't get your results. Can I say that you therefore made a mistake and there's an error? Or can I say that the replication failed? Or in fact, do I need to fix